Okay, welcome to the node.js build working group meeting for March 13th, 2025. Before we get started, does anybody have any announcements they'd like to share? Okay, if not, let's go on to the issues tagged for the agenda. The first one is the certificates expiring on 2025, well, March 30th. I think, Richard, you opened that. I don't know if you want to take us through that.
I did. I have seen that Ryan has acted on it and fixed it
Okay.
and closed it and opened another issue for another discussion, which I guess we'll get onto a bit later.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have a question that looks at the expiry. It triggered. I was a little bit worried last month that whether it was still running or not, but it did trigger a month out. And
Yep.
we have paid for certificates until 2027,
Yep.
but we're only allowed to issue certificates for 13 months at a time. So uh, cost wise or um, administrative wise, we're okay to 2027. There is work on us or whoever's maintaining Ryan or that to every 13 months issue new certificates on the current subscription.
Yep.
I guess if Ryan wants to talk about his proposal to maybe not have to buy this expensive web certificate. Um, yeah, that's all I have to say really is that's the context. It's been dealt with for this year, and I suppose there's a wider
Yep.
question for when we get to 2027 or perhaps before that. Do we just continue doing what we're doing, which involves the foundation paying for the certificate again,
How many
or is
months
there an
is it good
alternative?
for you set? Just for the minutes, it's
Every 13 months. So every certificate we issue is good for 13 months, and
yeah,
that's the
13 months.
maximum DigiCert
Yep.
allows, which has the effect that it actually makes it slightly later each year. So instead
Sure.
of being the same month each year, it
Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to find the add to the agenda. The other GitHub issue,
Okay.
4038 is the one I opened. So yeah, I went ahead and deployed all the certificates, or issued a new one, uh, put it in on all the Nginx servers and on Cloudflare, so that it's replaced all the existing ones and
Yep.
verified that the new job or the job to test that all works. Um, but yes, ongoing, this is sort of the old timey way of doing things, and now with the advent of Let's Encrypt and all sorts of other, there's not really a reason to pay for SSL certificates anymore. Um, so the question is, probably between now and the next time we need to swap it over, it would probably behoove us to switch over to using CertBot, which is the EFF's tool for automatically replacing certificates and automatically generating new Let's Encrypt certificates. That would allow us to just set it and forget it and never really have to worry about that sort of thing being an issue again. Um, there are, if there are any situations where we can't use CertBot, there are bash tools that have already been written that people fall back on, and we could use that too. But I think all of our environments where we actually need an SSL cert are pretty solidly modern and not edge case operating systems that don't do things. Um,
Yeah, from my
yeah,
perspective, if that's foundation recommended as a good practice, I have no reason to say not to, right? Like,
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Just
I think I commented in the issue, or if I haven't, I was going to. I think this is exactly the sort of thing that we were hoping that, getting FIT involved and taking over some of the build infrastructure, we could benefit from a more kind of, things that concerns that, go across projects where, we
mhm.
can't be the only project running a website that we want to have a certificate on and like having having a more unified approach to that, I guess, is one of the potential plus points of having an FIT involved. in maintaining the build infrastructure rather than, us rolling our own thing and then like the other projects rolling their own thing. We have, as an aside, been running certbot on the unofficial build server. So I think that was done as an experiment. It's been running for years. I think ever since we set up unofficial builds. We also had it running on the libuv server when we were hosting downloads for that project, but we no longer do that. So they're now hosting on their own infrastructure. So that's not something we do anymore. But
Okay.
while we were also running that Nginx with a certbot setup. So I personally don't have much experience on that, but I do know that we have done it in terms of in the project. So it feels like it shouldn't be too much of a unknown, I guess. Or
Yeah.
like I say, it's a known quantity outside of our project, and even within our project, there's been a few less critical servers that have been running on it, and I don't think we've really had any complaints or issues, or if they have been, they've been so far away that I can't they don't spring immediately to mind.
Yeah,
Um,
there's I noticed like Cloudflare has made an announcement that their automatically issued SSL certs are going to switch from Let's Encrypt to something else because in
okay.
September of 2024, Let's Encrypt switched to having a different intermediary cert that made it so that like really old devices wouldn't be able to connect. And so I
Yes.
think Cloudflare is being like, we want to support everything, and so switched off of their default. But so that could be one of the challenges if we switch over to just pure Let's Encrypt, that like people on Android 7 wouldn't be able to access Node.js web server. But I'm not sure if that's a,
Yeah.
who our target market and audience is for that, and whether or not that's an issue. So those are the only kind of gotchas too. But um the yeah, that's all I had to say about that.
So I think we've even talked about like certbot and stuff, but like it's just nobody's had cycles, so we just did what we did before because that was the easiest. So
Yep.
I would like you get right answer, open the issue unless anybody objects, and like I don't hear anybody objecting here. I think the assumption could be like yep, if you have cycles to make that happen, we should just do it, right?
Right. Yeah, the only other thing is I was going to ask is the libuv server, did that formerly live on our www server?
Like libuv.com, like is it .org or something?
Or
It was so we used to host the downloads on our www server. So they I don't know, the directory may still be there, but we don't serve so the DNS doesn't point there anymore. The DNS now points to, well, some other server that's not under our control. But yeah, we historically used to host the binaries for libuv. They weren't very big; they were like incredibly tiny. But there was an issue that came up, and I can't remember what that issue was, and they decided that it's actually more beneficial for them to be on a server that they actually controlled rather than asking Node to update things on their behalf.
Mhm.
It may have been around the time of the Let's Encrypt stuff. It may have been that. I can't remember. There was some issue that came up with it, and it was kind of like, yeah, let's fix it like in the short term, and then in the longer term, they just felt it was what's the point in being in the Node infrastructure? They moved off it. So yeah, if there are any references still, that should all be redundant now. Anything libuv related in the terms of serving files. So
Okay,
it would never the website. So they always ran their own website, but the actual binaries that you could download.
got it. And
It,
the other
in the end, we zipped it all up and then gave them the zip, and they put that somewhere else. Tarball, yeah.
great. And the other question that I had regarding this is this is certs are domain specific. Do we iojs.org is also a domain that's related? Would that be something that we'd want to manage with this as well?
I honestly don't know much about IOJS because it's really historic.
Mhm.
It
I
just redirects to nodejs.org like as a website.
Mhm. Because that can all be done at Cloudflare. We don't really need to have certs or anything like that. Um, as long as there's nobody expecting to go to iojs.org to
It'll be
unencrypted and direct and skip Cloudflare and be able to do
I
it via
think
HTTPS.
I think like Michael says, IOJS does redirect. I think the only question mark would be downloads, but I've got a feeling that also redirects, but I can't say for definite. I know we're running two separate Nginx servers on WW. So one
Mhm.
for IOJS and one for Node.js.org. But I can't remember. I suppose the easy way is to try and go to iojs.org/download.
do we
Um,
have two different certificates today?
I can't remember. We've only ever been renewing one of them.
Right, so that's why I'm wondering about the
Yeah.
question, right? Like, if we didn't have one before, we don't need to do anything new.
Yeah, it's more of a question of are there servers or services that I'm not aware of that iojs.org is supporting that we maintain that just this
Uh,
particular cert doesn't touch that. If it
so
is just
iojs.org/download does have a different certificate, which I'm not quite sure where that comes from. So that's iojs.org, but in a web browser, if I look at that certificate, it's got a common name of iojs.org, issued by
mhm,
Google Trust Services. So I don't actually know where that, uh, maybe that is using some sort of certbot setup
mhm,
because it says the validity period on the certificate is, uh, it was issued on the 11th of February this year and it expires on the 12th of May. So that's short term enough that I suspect that's probably some sort of certbot or equivalent setup.
yeah, I see
And I,
certbot is actually installed on our www server, so or at
it's
least
probably for that then. That would be my guess.
okay, cool.
But
It's
yeah,
it's already being used and already being done for that part. So
maybe. So this is one of those. It's historic. It's been there, and I don't think any of us have touched it, to my knowledge. Um, I don't even know how much traffic IOGS.org gets because it's like really old versions of Node, really, really old
mhm.
versions of Node. Um,
Though it doesn't have the most recent ones.
no, it has all the IOGS versions.
Okay, just the IOGS versions, right.
Yeah, and for historical reasons, they are still on the IOGS org domain rather than the
Sure.
Node.
Yeah, okay, it makes some sense. But yeah, we're talking 2015 for the nightlies.
Yeah,
I'm sure somebody out there is still pulling them down and testing on them, but I don't think enough to that it's mattered too much to us. I'm not even sure if we're serving that behind Cloudflare or R2. Well, it's probably definitely not on R2, but yeah, I don't know. It's,
there
it's all
is
historic.
there is some embedded controller on some Internet of Things device that is pulling from it, and that's
It's probably more likely someone's set up some CI system for some module somewhere, and that module has never dropped support for it or
yeah.
been updated. And we've just got some automated CIs somewhere that's pulling it down and testing with it.
But that is something, this would be like another thing that is a dependency on that second machine, right? Like, cause, or is this one coming from we were talking about getting rid of like I don't know what it was called, but like the second,
It it might be. We would have to delve it. So there is a separate entry in Cloudflare for iojs.org. So it's still under our account, but when you go
right?
into the
Yeah,
Cloudflare account, there's one
sure.
entry for node.js.org, which is where most of our stuff is being configured. There is
Mhm.
another entry for iojs.org. I've hardly looked at it, so there is an entry in there. It could very well be that it's still on the WW fall over
Right.
to unencrypted.
We still use the email, like our project emails are all iojs.org as well. So
Right, but that doesn't go through any of those
no, no,
servers.
yeah.
That's through a separate service that's not running on those servers.
Yeah. but domain wise, it's important to us still.
Okay, well, if we're serving any IOJS stuff on the web server, I can, as part of the uh, transition to a, Acme based Let's Encrypt system, I can make sure that that's also configured.
Yep.
And also sounds like it kind of already is, probably, which is why it's never come up that we've had to fix it.
Right.
Yeah, I think
We're already
Rod,
benefiting from this
I think Rod
strategy.
did switch some stuff over to Certbot at the time he said. Well, definitely I remember when he set unofficial builds up, it was on Let's Encrypt, and I think the question mark came up there that since we at the time were using it on libuv and at the time we're using it on unofficial builds, that maybe we could switch over the other stuff to it. And I think, as Michael said, we've just never had the cycles of time to
Yep.
to look at it. It's like yeah, the usual. It's not broken yet. Don't touch it. But obviously, yeah, there is a cost involved whenever we actually have to properly renew the certificate rather than reissue.
But Michael mentioning the other unencrypted server and its usage, that kind of dovetails nicely into our next agenda item.
Okay, go for it.
So the Equinix Metal Sunset. Well, maybe. Let me double check. I may have this. Yeah, there's two things. One of them is the
Yeah, right. So this one on the I should probably rename this. Now we have more information. So this particular one is about the ARM servers, and we have had confirmation that the ARM servers are also going to go away when Equinix Metal, well, actually ahead of Equinix Metal sunsetting next year. So I don't know how far ahead, but that's what we've been told. So I did reach out to ARM, and they kind of indicated that there are other providers that they support projects to run on, and I think I've probably have forgot to follow up on something to keep that ball rolling. But yeah, I did start a discussion on our own email threads as to what are there any preferred options or things we want to avoid. I think Ryan did ask some questions, and I need to go back and check what they were. Probably the easiest, no, I don't want to use the word easiest. The most sensible thing to do, Ryan, is probably to introduce you into the original email thread I had with the person from ARM, and then try and get you in touch with whoever you need to get in touch with on the ARM side. I don't remember the specifics, but I think you were looking for like a technical contact or someone that understood more the technical offerings that were being made in terms of how those servers would be allocated and provisioned. So I think, yeah, if I send a follow-up email back to the ARM person I was talking to and introduce you, and then hopefully you can continue the discussion with them. Because again, I feel that if it ends up being that we end up with servers at a different provider that's not Equinix Metal, then that falls under the things that I think we wanted the foundation to be more involved with in terms of relationships with providers,
right,
even if it, whatever shape and form that takes. But it
right.
does feel like that's the sort of a relationshipy question. Obviously, there are technical things that we can help out with when and where that happens. But yeah, I mean, I don't even know, while there are other providers that offer ARM hardware, I don't know how equivalent the ARM hardware will be to our existing, our the ARM hardware that Equinix Metal are providing for us is ridiculously powerful, and
Okay.
it will be interesting to see what we end up being offered elsewhere, and whether that means we need to reevaluate the workloads we're pushing through the current CI on ARM.
Yeah. So two things with this. One is ARM is has their own agreement with providers for their works on ARM program. So kind of like
Yes.
OpenJS Foundation has established agreements with providers to help out
Yep.
JavaScript projects. ARM has established agreements with providers to help out ARM, and they're donating these machines to us. So in that situation, I don't think we've got a lot of, or we don't really want to use any leverage to be like, hey, actually, we want to have all these machines to test ARM if they're providing them for free. So
Yes. Yeah.
so I don't foresee us having just like with Equinix, we didn't have user account access or admin access to their Equinix account. we probably won't have access to their other account either. So this is sort of it's on ARM to give us what they're going to give us, right? And
Yeah, I kind of feel that also though that there seem to be, well, perhaps I'm just reading between the lines. It sounded like they were saying we have a range of options. What would
mhm.
work best for you? Obviously,
and
whatever that.
and every
Yeah,
every one of those clouds that they have agreements with, we also
yeah,
have agreements with, and I've worked with all of them except Tencent. That's the only one I've never logged
yeah,
into. So that would be like the one that I'd be like, well, maybe not that one. But yeah, we've got agreements with the Oracle Cloud and everything else, and we have tooling to interact with all those. But ideally, I wouldn't have to do much besides give them the Jenkins ID and give them an SSH key, just like
yeah. I
we
mean,
have like
that's always the hope with our setup is as long as we can get into the server with an
yeah.
SSH key, then in theory, the Ansible scripts should take care of that.
Now now as
Yeah,
far as the performance and the power and the workload needs, ARM
yeah,
isn't going to know that. We
yeah,
know that for Node, like.
yeah,
And yeah, what we have now is overpowered and we don't need that. But what
yeah.
do we need? I think that's probably
Exactly.
what ARM is going to need from us is, what do you need to test
Like
Node?
the question is it overpowered? Like, I don't know, Richard, if you know what percentage we're using.
I don't know in terms of utilization. I do know that we are running a lot of workloads on the machine. So we effectively divided the machines up into containers, and then the containers just run workloads. It's enough that if the CI is busy, I see queues of jobs, but they're not lengthy, long queues. They are just queues that get processed. It's reasonably healthy in terms of I see through Jenkins, but it's equally not so overpowered that we never see queues because there's all they're all sitting around idle. So, um, but we are using that to test both 64-bit ARM and 32-bit ARM through the use of containers, because the hardware supports running 32-bit ARM um, instructions. Um, but yeah, I don't know. So what I do know is the machines we're currently using are much more powerful than the machines we used to have at Equinix. This is all through like Packet before Packet was bought by Equinix and became Equinix Metal. So we've gone through different uh, generations of ARM hardware, if that's the word. And the Ultras were much more powerful than what we had before. I can't remember what the type of ARM machines were that we had before, and Stuart would know. But yeah, I do know that we have a few ARM servers at OSU, which
Mhm.
are significantly less resourced, um, to the point that I don't think it's a complete show. I mean, I wouldn't be relying on the, if you were to cut out the Equinix Metal servers, I think then we would have a problem because the capacity at OSU wouldn't be enough.
Mhm.
The capacity that we've got at OSU is kind of, we had to source machines at OSU because we lost the release ARM server at Equinix. So that was on one of the older ARM hardware that was retired. And at that point, it was retired, and they were not willing to give us an Ultra, another Ultra. So we decided to try and pursue getting a smaller ARM server somewhere else. And what we actually have is an OpenStack uh, quota at Ozil. So we had enough to stand up a release server, and then the rest we had, I just set up another small server. So we had some fallover just in case we had temporary blips on Equinix Metal, which have been very rare. So yeah, I think we hopefully we can get things from the Works and ARM, continue to get something from Works and ARM, and then whatever we can get, I think we then have a look at and see if that scales to what we need, or we might need to make decisions about whether we can still support everything on. So
Mhm.
as an example, Michael, we moved like the debug testing to the
Yep,
ARM hardware because the ARM
sure.
hardware was like more powerful. Should it be that it turns out that's not the case, then we might need to consider if we need to move the ARM, sort of the debug testing somewhere else. Because I don't think the debug testing absolutely has to be on ARM, but it's on ARM because that's where we felt we had some
Sure.
spare capacity.
I'm like, let's just go to them and say, this is what we got. What can you give
Yep.
us? Right? Like,
Yeah.
let's not spend a whole bunch of our own time to ask for less than we might be able to get. Let's basically say, hey, we got these machines. Can you get an equivalent ones? If they say yes, Excellent. We just
Okay.
keep going. We've leveraged them in different ways. Like you said, we might be able to switch, but then we'd have to find somewhere else. And so, like, best case, they just say, oh, we got another provider. They'll give you two of those, right? And we're done. And I think so, like, let's ask,
Okay.
see what they offer, and then we can go from there, right? Like, and ask with the, hey, this is what we had before. So, like, if you give us that, then we're
Okay.
done, right?
Okay.
Otherwise, like, I don't know,
Yeah. And
let's wait to
okay.
do the
So
work until we have to.
let's put the next action on this on me to follow up back to the ARM person. I'll
Okay.
like loop Ryan into the email chain,
Okay.
and we'll
Mhm.
just keep that going. Um,
Sounds good. Okay, so did you want to, that was one aspect, but I think where you were going, Ryan,
Yeah,
was possibly the new machine requirement, replace Equinix
right.
x64
Which
server. So
is
why don't we jump to there?
we've replaced everything except unencrypted.
Okay.
Unencrypted was like, do we need this? And then I got on there and the rsync logs show that there is considerable amount of rsync mirrors rsyncing our downloads from there, and I'm not sure, we don't know how much that gets used outside of us because they're mirrors, so I think we still need to provide that service.
Okay.
Now, is that a service our web server could manage and it doesn't have to come off unencrypted? Or is that a service that, does it need to be another machine that hosts this? That I'm unsure about. Kind of thought I would bring it up here. Like, should continue to offer this service with, so that we don't break a bunch of people, or at least put a word out that, hey, we need to, we need to move it off of Equinix because Equinix is going away. So it needs to exist somewhere else. And I think that I don't think we would have time to deprecate the use of that service
Sure.
before we would need to move it. So we
So
we need to move
the
it.
two reasons, like the reasons I could like top ahead, two reasons why it could have been on its own machine is one, load, two, security, right? Like, we're basically allowing unencrypted rsync from a machine. I think there's more sensitive things on the main server than there are on this other server, right? So like, and load wise, we certainly had load challenges before. I don't know if that still applies, but like
I,
the two
I,
things.
yeah, I think load wise, we are in a much better situation now that we've shunted the main traffic onto R2. So while there is still traffic, R2 ultimately still has to come to the origin web servers at least once. No, is that true? No, no, it's not true. Because we do push stuff directly to R2. So yeah, I think the traffic probably isn't so much of a concern, although I don't know how much traffic we are getting on unencrypted, but I haven't seen, for example, unencrypted fall over or get anything out of Cloudflare saying that, well, actually, maybe they're not going through Cloudflare would be the issue. I don't know. But yeah, I think the security thing might be worth considering because,
Yeah.
the rsync is another open endpoint. So it's a risk of like if that ever gets compromised, what does that open up? If you were to get onto the WW server, you would be able to push things up to R2 storage, which I
Mhm.
do not believe is the case if you were to get onto unencrypted. Um, so just on that front, my default position would be to try and keep them separate if we can. Um, I guess in the short term, because I think we'd had a discussion previously as to the stuff we are doing that's sensitive on the WW server, could that be broken off or scaled back so that it's a much smaller server that's only got isn't serving files or doing something that's a much less than what the WW server is actually doing. But I suspect that will be a bigger piece of transformation work than than getting to the sunset. So
Yeah, and I did a
yeah.
little preliminary exploring of whether or not there was any possibility at all to have like an S3 backed rsync
Uh-huh.
translation layer, and that looks like a no-go. I don't
Okay.
see any sort of thing in there that any sort of
I suspect you would
mechanism.
need to, at least on R2, you'd probably need to write a worker,
Mhm.
like a whole app that was mimicking the
Right,
R2
an rsync
protocol.
endpoint worker that
Yeah. which I don't know if one exists, but it feels like that would be a lot more work, or you know, it's just, it will be more risky, I would imagine, than
Right. And most people would be like, why are you building a tool to mirror something that is already mirrored and spread everywhere? You know,
I mean, I imagine the people mirroring the downloads will be things like, I think there is at least two or more Chinese mirrors that I don't know how up to date they are, but
right. Because that's full.
um,
Yep.
and again, I don't think these are like, it's not like we've officially sanctioned mirrors, but like we've offered the endpoint, so people have been syncing. I'm assuming that, given that I know that there are mirrors out there, that this is how they're getting the stuff. It's either that, isn't it, or you start spidering the actual download website itself.
Mhm.
I don't know what they're doing, but yeah,
Yeah. And there's always like, secure facilities that need to pull in all the
yeah,
data, and then all their builds are running inside of a
exactly.
top secret security kind of thing or something, and
Yeah.
that are unconnected from the internet but need a mirror. So I guess these things do have separate use cases that we might not understand. Okay,
And
so long
it's
story short,
it's
I'll move it somewhere.
okay.
The where to move it to is, we had been moving everything off Equinix over to MNX. I could do that. I could look in our quiver of other service providers like DigitalOcean or Azure or anything else, and see what else we could come up with for just a server that does this. The thing that I'm also sort of lacking is any sort of knowledge about whether or not we have an effective Ansible for unencrypted, or whether or not that just needs to be sort of a pet that we, cobble together
I
and
would
make work.
say that it's the exact same situation as WW, which is we do not know for definite that running the Ansible scripts would set up the server exactly the way it's supposed to. But we have been trying to mirror every change made to, like, say, the Nginx config into the Ansible scripts. So it's one of
Mhm.
those, in theory, everything should be there, but we've never actually tested that by trying to stand up a server again.
So I might be able to stand up this new unencrypted server, and it might be like have
Yeah.
something wrong with how it delivers the website, but that doesn't matter because we're not delivering a website in the rsync stuff. Or the rsync doesn't, the rsync won't be in the Ansible at all, right? For example, like that's
Yeah,
probably not there.
I can't remember if I've seen rsync stuff in the Ansible. It might be there. I just might have overlooked it.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Ansible stuff was written after the event. So the servers were set up, then the Ansible scripts were written, and then as the servers have been maintained, the Ansible scripts have been updated. But I am not aware that we've ever, started from scratch from Ansible and seen if we end up with what we've got now. And we've
Mhm.
always been, because I suppose to a lesser degree on unencrypted, but definitely on like WW, it's like these are live servers. We don't necessarily want to just run the Ansible scripts on them on the premise that they should be idempotent or should cause no
Right.
no, yeah, it's just the risk there is like we just don't know. So because we don't know, and we know that if the downloads disappeared, you know, that would be a lot of pain all around.
Yes.
I mean, maybe now that things are behind R2 and Cloudflare, that maybe there might be an opportunity. But again, it's like this. I think a lot of us are just hesitant to risk something that we're not quite sure what would what the
Yeah.
sort of remediation will be. So
So
it's an opportunity, I guess. If we still feel that Ansible is, I mean, I like it for setting up the test machines and stuff, but I guess for servers, it's another question as to how often are we changing the configs on these servers, and how often do we want that through the repeatable. I think it is good if it, in an ideal world, if like there was a repeatable setup in Ansible, although I just don't know how you would validate that other than either having something spare you could keep running it on to compare, or you say, right, no, this really is idempotent, so we can run this on the live server, and if it ever then becomes not idempotent, we'll know about it. That's always the challenge, isn't it, with live infrastructures, to how do you test changes?
I think this is our opportunity. If we can have an overlap, this is our opportunity to use the Ansible script, like do the best manual checks to say, does it still seem to work? Flip it over, but have the other machine ready to flip back if there's a problem, right? Like,
Mhm.
given that we could have like a month overlap or more, we could try and do that. It's like, okay, we've set up the new machine using an Ansible script, so we now know that like that is the actual documented config. We've at some point we're confident, like I would think you need to check and say like, oh yeah, I can still see the rsync servers running and all the pieces we think are running are great. We could strip out the stuff that we don't need, like the web server. And then it's like, okay, on this day, maybe even we like post, hey, by the way, we're making a switch and let us know if you have any problems. And we're ready to just basically flip the DNS back if like a flood of things come in and say, oh, it doesn't work. Okay, well then we can flip back, right? Like,
Mhm.
seems to me like that's the time. This is the time to do it, if ever, right?
Yeah. The sort of the other question I have about this unencrypted machine is we were sort of like, well, what are we using it for? Well, it was this secondary backup to the
Yeah.
backup to, and also it's this rsync machine. When we make the new one, does it need to have all those roles, or are we really making just a new rsync server endpoint and that it contains downloads, offers up rsync as an endpoint, but doesn't need to be a backup of the Cloudflare? Like what does this other server actually need to do? I mean, we know we need an rsync endpoint, but do we need to do anything else with it?
I guess the question, what would happen if the existing www goes away? Like in the past, it would just flip over to the other one, things kept running. Like, so
Well,
is
to a degree, if you were trying to get to WW and it fell over, your individual connection would get broken, but then a subsequent one would then be directed to the fallover. So, it's not seamless. But yeah, again, the question then is like, normally if WW falls over, it recovers itself. So you would have a brief outage. I guess the outage will be slight. I mean, we're talking, we're not talking about hours of outage. We're talking like seconds, minutes.
that
Um,
the only impact? Like, if www went away, would we still be able to do new releases?
no,
Okay, so that doesn't
but
change. Like,
that's not even like that's not even the external people trying to get at the server. That is our whole release pipeline is centered on the WW server.
right. So what I'm just trying to get at is like,
Hmm.
what kind of fallback did it really give us? If it was strictly because of the
None.
website, if
Yeah.
like if like everything breaks except for serving the dead downloads, if it goes away,
Yeah.
then like the move to Cloudflare may mean that like, well, wait a sec, we don't expect like
Yeah.
Cloudflare covers the availability of the downloads, and if WW goes away, it's still a big thing because all of our releasability fails, but like removing it doesn't change that, right? So like if that was the only fallback we got from it, then I think it's
I
important.
I don't even know if those parts are replicated on unencrypted. I think unencrypted really was just a replication of the Nginx configs and
Right.
the download data. Um, I mean, obviously, probably double check that, but that was my recollection that the actual data onto unencrypted was another rsync process that was rsyncing from WW, I think, or the other way around. I always forget which way around it is, but it was an rsync process that was going one way.
Right.
Um, and it wasn't rsyncing the entire server, it was rsyncing specific directories over.
I think so I could see that it gave us higher availability in terms of like serving the downloads. Did it
Yeah,
also I know we have a backup server, but does that backup server also get copies of all downloads? Or
yes.
was this other one? So, okay, so basically in terms of
But,
availability, we've got
but
backup.
backup has never been public facing.
Right,
So backup in the true sense of it's a backup.
sure.
Unencrypted was that's why I was trying to use the word failover rather than backup for unencrypted, because
Mhm.
unencrypted is a live public facing web server.
Totally get that. I'm just like, if www goes away,
Mhm.
do we still have copies of the debt binaries which we want to serve for the next 20 years?
Yes.
And
At
so
the moment, at the moment, the binaries are in 4 places: in R2, on WW, on unencrypted, and on backup. Which
right,
sounds like a lot. I mean, we didn't have the R2 stuff before, and yeah,
right.
unencrypted, WW, and backup as like, um,
So, and if www goes away, like, are we
yeah.
confident that all of the Cloudflare stuff just keeps on serving? There's no case where it needs to like, oh, wait a sec, I need to go pull something from the server and cache it.
I think it should be the case now that everything is actually staged in R2.
Okay.
So I don't believe that there is a situation where it needs to, but I mean, it is configured to do that. I just don't know in any situation. I believe Cloudflare is configured to go to the servers. I just can't imagine what scenario that it would fail to find something in an R2 and need
Right.
to go to the origin server.
Okay.
But I admit that at this point, I am slightly less clear on how things operate at the Cloudflare level. But my understanding is that, what situations is R2 storage going to be unavailable, but the rest of Cloudflare, the actual CDN is still there.
Sure.
I don't know the answer to that. I think in theory it's possible that it goes to the origin set, but I stand by that. I've seen very little. So we do occasionally see Cloudflare notifications for WW, but they're much, much, much less rare. So we used to get them every few weeks, and I think I've only seen 1 or 2 in the whole time period that.
Right. Why do we get any?
Oh, I don't remember though. I think there was one, but I don't remember what that was. And
Okay.
it doesn't really tell you. It just says there was a small blip and it recovered. And it could have just been that maybe DigitalOcean had a brief
Sure.
brief blip.
Yeah.
Because I think there is some liveness probe
Sure.
in
Yep.
Cloudflare. So it could have just been the liveness
Okay.
probe fell over. I
Yep.
don't know that actually anything. I suppose maybe there are Nginx logs on the machine that we could check, but I guess the difficulty there is it's still possible to get to those machines directly.
So that might be something worth checking is like with the team who's done the Cloudflare, like, hey, yeah, no, www could go away. Everything still getting served. In which case, well, I guess, yeah, because the website's somewhere else. So like, if that's the case, then I would say, we could trim down what the
I
backup server does.
I think I would be comfortable removing unencrypted as a failover for the website.
Right.
I guess one of the things to check would be the IOJS serving situation, because that might just be outside of all the transformation that we've done
Sure.
recently. I think probably IOJS was not included in that. So that may be something to just check. And that doesn't necessarily mean we have to replicate it, but it might just be that we understand what the impact would be, on the IIGS domain. We might decide that it's acceptable that maybe IIGS.org is not as robust as as before. But I mean, that's a decision we'll have to make if that actually is the case, that that there is some additional effect on that domain versus the Node.js domain. It may be that we decide that we need to replicate some of the Node.js setup, the more recent transformation onto the IIGS domain. But I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I think the risk more of unencrypted will be things like the rsync stuff, where it's just like it's there, and it's only that we've recently rediscovered that it's there. And again, how important is that? I don't know. So it's kind of like, yeah, maybe we can just scale back what it's doing or remove what it's doing.
And
Or
I think
yeah,
we've already said we should keep the rsync. So like
yeah,
that's
Mhm.
one. The
yeah,
question I think Ryan has is like, okay, so we need an unencrypted replacement. We know we need rsync on it. What else needs to be there?
Yep. It's yeah. Does it need to exist and move everything over and kind of find out what's it every oddball role it may be playing, or kind of just build an rsync server and stand it up in its place?
That's where like my
I,
my thinking is if we have a transition period, we can do our best to say like, what are the roles and just say yes or no, and then flip it over and see, right?
I think I would be comfortable setting up a minimalistic rsync server with obviously we need to have the data on there. And like Michael suggests, maybe then, if we've got the opportunity, flip it over, see if we've broken someone that we had not anticipated we would break, and then make a decision there about switching back, or is that case something that we're not actually going to support moving onwards? I think I would support that.
Yeah, and I think like maybe just like we could do a blog post ahead of time that says like, hey, here's what we're doing. It's,
Yeah.
we're going to continue. Like if you're using unencrypted, because I guess like, can we tell, like if you're going to unencrypted directly, we're replacing the machine. We're only moving this over. If you're using anything else, let us know. Or, I don't know. We can do some things to try and reduce the risk
Because
like that.
yeah, I mean we can set up, well, put Ryan, won't it? Yeah, another server can be set up, and it's only at the point that we swap the DNS and Cloudflare configuration over that it would be noticeable, I
Right.
guess. I mean, I am assuming that people are thinking on the domain name and not directly on the IP address. But if they're thinking on the IP address, there's nothing really we can do with that, because that would
Yeah.
that's going to go away. So
No, there's no
assuming they're doing the
guarantees for
sensible
that.
thing, which is
Yeah.
to think on the domain name, then it will be at the point that we decide, right, on this day we're going to flip the domain name entry, and then people trying to get there will end up here rather than where they currently ended up. And that, once we get to the point where we think we've got a server, then we can plan like, okay, let's have a blog post. Let's announce that, we'll switch over on this date,
Yeah.
and take it from there. Because in an ideal world, we'll switch it over and find that we don't have to switch it back. At that point, we can
Right.
just
Well, exactly. The goal is we switch it and like, because there's the IOGS thing, there's the rsync thing, there was the web backup, but I think we've said like the web backup, we're relatively, if we just check with the people who worked on Cloudflare, like as long as they say, yeah, it doesn't really need www to be there, things will keep going, then I'm comfortable saying that like we're probably as good or better than we were, right? So that role we wouldn't have to move over.
Mhm.
I don't know if there were any other roles, but like, or how we would figure them out. Like, I guess Ryan, the interesting thing would be to look through the Ansible script and like see what's set up. And then, that could be the checklist that says, okay, if there's some code that looks like it's setting something up, do we still need that? Yes or
Yeah.
no, right? And like if there's something else, well, that was manually set up and we don't know about, I don't know how else we could figure that out unless like, you've done the PS or tops or whatever, and like
Yeah.
obviously running, if there's nothing else, then kind of
Poke
we
around.
best, yeah.
Yeah. Poke around for some syslogs and just see if there's anything being logged
Yeah,
on the system that's like, what is happening?
exactly. We can kind of say
What
we did this, we did this, we did this, and then like there's the flip over and we're ready to flip back. That's
mhm.
probably a reasonable person can say, yeah, you did your best, and way to go.
One thing I happened to notice yesterday while kind of digging around on www to see how the certbot stuff was working and checking some logs. There's several instances of too many open files in the Nginx logs on
Yes,
www, which
we've never got to the bottom of that. So when we had all sorts of uh, when we had the situation where the server kept falling over, this was before we moved anything to R2. We did have a few people from Cloudflare make suggestions that we tried, but we always ran out of file descriptors, and we've never quite got to the bottom of that.
okay,
If you want to investigate that, that would be my guess.
that's a
We've more
long-standing issue, is what you're saying.
ameliorated that by shifting the majority of the workload off. So if we are still running out of file descriptors, that's interesting, but I think it's have less impact to day-to-day operations
Right. But
because
may also be why it still might flip over to unencrypted if that's happening.
yeah, but that we've got notifications set up in Cloudflare for when it switches over, and we are just not seeing those emails. Like I said, I think there was one, but it was only one since like last November, whereas before it was a lot more common, like every week, every week or every other week.
Yeah.
Or, it was enough to be noticeable, but it was always like it always auto recovered, but we would get a spate of emails saying, you know, it's gone down, now it's come back up. So, as far as I know, that the notification is still working. It's just we've had a lot less instances of it being an issue. And I think the main reason for that is the majority of the load has been shifted off. We presumably are still getting load in terms of the release process, and the nightly builds are all going through that server. And like all servers that we've got in Node, it's really scary if you look at failed logins and see the amount of attempts that people are trying to just you know just get into any server that they can publicly access. But yeah, that on itself is scary. So that's one of the reasons that we're running off firewall on the www server, was to try and
And are these the load balancing health alert emails?
in Cloudflare, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I was just checking the see if I could see these so I could also track that a little bit. Okay. We're running real short on time.
Yeah, but I think we're basically we got 3 minutes. Any of these others that we need to talk about this time?
The only one I just kind of want to bring up real quick, because you're the person to talk to about this, is the 1Password. I know that Node has a 1Password account, but Build isn't using it, and Build doesn't have access to it. TSC does. Should we try and use that, or should we set up another one for Node's build group?
I think the main, so it's been mentioned before, but I think one of the blockers before is like some of the scripts actually use, like you've cloned the repo and it will actually decrypt things that are in the repo, the secrets repo, and use them for you, which I don't think we know how to do with 1Password.
Well, I think we can with 1Password. I mean, 1Password has APIs and stuff for that, so that was something I wanted to explore. But I don't have a 1Password to explore with unless we set one up.
I don't see any reason why if we want to explore an experiment, we couldn't create like a vault in the project's 1Password. I don't know why we would create because I assume in that case we can like create a vault which has the same access restrictions as
I think the
secret,
difference,
right?
the difference would be, who, as a TSC member, do I have full access to that vault, or is that only for the TSC areas of the 1Password?
I think that's
Has,
probably a good conversation. Like in
yeah.
theory, I think all TSC members are organization owners.
So that would be a difference. So
Right.
if we were to create a build area of 1Password, if in theory like the whole of the TSC that aren't in build would be in theory able to get in there, then I'm not saying that's a particular, that is a discussion we can have, is that actually a problem? But it would be a change in terms of access. So at the moment, the only people that have access to build secrets are the people that we've explicitly given GPG
Right.
key
Yep.
access to. I'm sure we could probably replicate that in 1Password. The question there is does it have to be, could it be done in an existing 1Password, or would it have to be something separate? I don't know the answer to that. That might be something that needs to be looked at.
We could get opinions from the
discuss
TSC. Like the TSC are all org owners in GitHub, so
but they're not. So they don't currently have access to the core infrastructure of Node.
I understand, but like,
Yeah.
if we allow every TSC member to have full access to the GitHub repo, is it that we will now not trust them to have access to the infrastructure? I don't know, right?
We don't.
Like you said,
We don't trust them to have access to the infrastructure, which is the current position. So the point is that if we gave them access, that's a change in.
sure, yeah,
You remember the threat modeling that was done by the
yeah,
security?
no, true, yeah, I know,
So
we changed that, so
yeah, it will be a change. So I'm not saying that it's, we absolutely have to keep what we've currently got. I'm just saying it's going to be a fundamental shift in the trust model of the project. And
Well,
to me, it would be a loosening of security. Whether that actually matters is another question.
well, I don't think it has to be, because right now, whatever you've got in the TSC's got access to for 1Password, and that they're all owners, that structure doesn't have to persist. You can restructure it and be like, okay, well, now the only people that own one password are, the JS Foundation and a couple of key infra members, and then the TSC and everything they had access to before is now in this vault, and everything that infra has is in this other vault, and redelegate and restructure the whole thing. But that would be, it doesn't have to be like, because TSC currently are owners, then they get
Sure.
access to
Yeah.
everything.
Anyway, I think short is, I think we all support the idea of experimenting with that. We just need
Yeah.
to be careful about access. That's
Yeah.
And by careful, I mean we need to be, we need to know what we're doing.
Yeah. Well, and that's part of what's
Yeah.
motivating me to do this, because I like added some access to the MNX console for the SmartOS stuff. I was like, well, I've got access I should add this in. And then I'm like, every time we offboard somebody, they just keep all the passwords, and
Yeah. I know it's definitely
it's,
not ideal.
I've lost a laptop before.
Yeah.
And if that's
Yeah,
I mean,
safest thing there is then you assume everything's been compromised. Even if it hasn't, you don't know, but you just assume it
yeah.
has.
So it's been the automation of secrets. So like I think Richard said, since we're basically out of time, is like, if you can figure out how to make that work, then I don't think there's anything else that people would really complain about. And we could there's definitely ways where it would be more secure. So like there'd be
Right.
the argument, right?
In terms of the issues open, just very quickly, the levels of access we currently have, which are like infra, test, build infra, those are really to make things easier for us to conceptualize. I mean, there's no reason that we can't give people individual access to, a secret, but then it becomes a lot harder to track in terms of, we've given so and so access to this, whereas the less groupings we have. So on the one hand, it means that there's less fine graining, but on the other hand, it's a little bit easier to say, right, this person has this level of access, which means they actually have access to all of this. It's a balance between how do you actually understand it and what is the actual case.
Yeah.
Right.
But I think just sticking with that to start, like basically if we had a say you created a new build org, and it had those 3 different levels, like the main concern would be like, okay, how do we automatically use the secrets to generate the tokens for the Ansible and that kind of stuff. I don't think there's anything else automated than that. And the rest of it, I think we could figure out. Like Richard said, it might give us more options and being more granular, but just saying like, hey, we've replicated the same levels would be the least amount of discussion, work, whatever, right?
Yeah, I think the only thing I'm kind of lacking to understand how to proceed is whether or not I should proceed with the infra group or this system having owner access to a 1Password somewhere, or whether or not it would be a subordinate account within the existing 1Password, and whether I should set up a test account, set up a test vault,
honestly, like my take would be the path of least resistance might be to just create one for build. And the vault, like we could always transition to the other one, I think, relatively easily. I don't know.
Sure.
Right? Like build has a separate setup now. Let's keep a separate setup. Replicate.
Yeah, it was just whether or not I should apply for a open source account through 1Password and for build or not. That's the other part of it.
Maybe we could just put together like here are the 2 options. 1, we apply for a new one for build. 2, we'll need to restructure the existing 1Password so less people have access to the top level. Like TSC members would no longer have access to the top level. They would only have access to specific vaults. The only thing there too is like, can we make it granular enough so like TSC members can still admin things? We don't want to call up 1 or 2 people to do configuration like, hey, we've onboarded a TSC member and like, well, no, that now requires me to be the only person or somebody else to be the only person who can do it, right? Like that's not the model we want. And that I don't know well enough, right? Like, can we have admins who can admin some things but not others? And
anyway, it sounds like the next step then is to take those questions to this issue and have the continue discussion.
Cool.
Discussion there.
Okay, any other things we need to chat before we close out for this week?
I this morning may have figured out what's wrong with the Intel builds on Mac OS.
Okay, that'd be
Okay,
great.
that's good news.
Yeah, I thought the Ccache was working, and it is. It's creating files, but it's creating files with permissions that I don't think it can read. So
Okay.
the Ccache is filling, but it's not being used.
Well, that would make a big difference.
I kept looking like, is this working? Yeah, the files are there, and
Hmm.
I guess the only other thing that was on the agenda, just let us know if you need anything from us in terms of the Windows certificate stuff. It sounds from the Slack discussions that you and Felix have an idea of what needs to happen.
yeah,
I would
and
make sure Stefan knows whatever it is
mhm.
that is going on, because I think he's the one other person that was involved when we set up the existing. I don't even know what it's called now, but the signing
Yeah,
setup we're on at the moment is
the
not what we were
Digicert
on
Vault thing.
before, and it sounds like we're moving to something else again. So
Yeah, and
just make sure
this is
Stefan
another
knows.
one of those like, here's a $5,000 every 2 years cost to create a signing certificate that only Windows charges you. Except now Azure has this system that's like, oh, as long as you go through Azure, it's virtually
Okay.
free. So it's yeah.
Well, it's not the only system. Mac OS does something similar, doesn't it? Where
Yeah, except
we,
macOS is like $100 a year,
yeah,
and it's
whatever
it's
the
the
dollar
same.
amount is, but it's just
Yeah,
the idea that there is some ongoing charges for
yeah,
various things.
and there's not things like quantity of signatures that you run out of on the macOS side of things. So
Okay, I was very
it's a little
surprised that
easier,
that was the case in Windows, but
Yeah.
I guess it's because we've moved to this slightly
and
different sign
it may
model.
just be the provider that we move to that we're like, hey, how can we make more money off of this? Well, we can charge by number of signs. Like who knows? All of the selling SSL certs or selling domain names or selling selling tangentially selling the shovels to the miners for the internet. It's always been a
Yeah.
little bit. Yeah.
Okay,
Right.
so anything else since we're quite a few minutes after, anything else?
Uh, yeah, sorry. The very last thing, I had pinged Targos about this in the thing. For the release builds, the Mac OS instances are not using Ccache, and I don't know if that's supposed to be or not. And it's part of what's causing, it may be what's causing the Intel builds on the ARM machines to take like 3.5 hours, which is sort of, and it's like baked into the make file. So I don't know who to talk to about this. I don't know who's got the Mac OS building node.js for release knowledge. I'm not sure who to reach out to, but I'm out of my depth on fixing that.
I guess my question would be, like, we use Ccache and all the other on like the other Linux platforms in the releases.
We do, yeah.
So like all I could do, if it was me, all I could do is send an email to the iojs.org, like build at iojs.org to say, like, does anybody have any context as on why we might not do this?
I know who has the context. I just don't know if he remembers it or would still be. It would be Ash because he set that
Right.
up.
I guess we can
Um,
include him on that email, and it's basically like, unless somebody says, yeah, there's a reason why not, then we just try it. Like, I don't know what else we
I mean,
can.
I think I don't know the answer to that. I do remember the context, which is when we set all that up, it was so early on that there was very little like software for Macs, and he managed to get it working in the configuration we've got at the moment. So I don't know if there are other ways or better ways of doing it, but basically the way that we got is the way he managed to get it to work. Um, I don't know how Ccache works, whether we end up with having separate versions of Ccache for ARM versus Intel. Because there's different ways you can invoke Ccache. One is to have a symbolic link to Ccache on the path, but I don't know how that operates on Mac OS when you've got both ARM and Intel, running in Rosetta. I don't know how that figures itself out, or if it does figure itself out, or whether you need separate things for Ccache. So on some platforms you can do it by you prefix the build command with Ccache, GC, whatever your compiler is, and on other platforms it's relying on you having the symbolic link to the Ccache binary on the path, and then when something invokes something like GCC, it actually invokes Ccache, and then Ccache has some magic to figure out, oh, it actually needs to re-invoke GCC somewhere else on the path. But yeah, I'm less familiar with Mac OS to know how it worked or was supposed to work.
Is Ccache used with the ARM builds? Ryan, you're just mentioning that it's fast. Like, is it just because it's
Yeah,
fast or because it's
no,
doing it? No, right. Okay, it's just fast.
not. So it might not even be the C cache that's the issue. It's just something about being on the ARM machine and
Yeah.
building a binary for Intel,
Yeah.
because we don't have a way to build binaries on Intel and also sign them.
Well, I
I
can,
don't know
that's
if that's
understandable that it's slower then if
no,
it's,
the main reason that we're building the Intel binaries on ARM is to have a universal installer, a
Mhm.
universal binary installer.
yeah,
So it's all built on the ARM platform and then all bundled into the same macOS installer. So that's why
Got
they're
it.
all there. I'm guessing there might be a more complicated scenario where you build Intel on Intel, build ARM on ARM, and then somehow glue them together. That's beyond my capabilities of understanding on ARM, on macOS. But
Yeah.
that's the reason that we build Intel binaries on ARM, because we used to build so you used to have a tarball package and a PKG macOS installer package, and we were building tarballs of macOS for Intel on Intel. I think we're still doing that. Okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
maybe the hub model.
we still make
yeah,
tarballs.
Yeah,
Intel tarballs on Intel,
yeah, yeah. But
ARM
we
tarballs on
always
ARM.
built the Intel binaries again on ARM so that we could package them into the universal installer. So it was felt at the time that we
Hi, Richard. Thanks.
added
Or Michael.
macOS on
Thanks.
ARM that it would be it was decided that we would have universal installers rather than have an installer for Intel and an installer for ARM.
Yeah, no,
Again,
that makes
yeah,
sense. It's
it
just
makes sense, but yeah,
I don't know if it's
yeah,
I just need to talk to somebody. Yeah, Ash, it sounds like, is the person that might have the most
he set it
familiarity
all up.
with
Yeah,
this. Okay, that's the part that
but
I
whether
like.
he
I've
remembers,
got this all set up, and it's like this is too slow, and it's making it hard to make releases because now the release engineer has to go and be like, push the button, and then walk away and come back 5, 6 hours later, hoping it's done, and
yeah,
it's all waiting on just this one thing, and it's like,
I think we have reasonable confidence that Ccache is not an issue for release builds in general. That we do use Ccache on other platforms for releases. So if the question is,
will that
should we
help?
be using it? Will it help? Then yeah, if it can be made to work,
Yeah, yeah,
great.
and the only thing is like this is,
Yeah,
all the test builds are using resetting CC and everything
yeah,
else to to use Ccache, but
yeah.
this is actually in the make file directly executing.
I think part of that is because none of the test builds are trying to build universal binaries. So the makefile is directly executing twice. So I think if I remember correctly, the actual Jenkins release job just runs one makefile target, but the makefile target itself has the two build. So I think one build is prefixed with whatever you need to prefix to end up in Rosetta, and the other one isn't. Um,
Got it.
and yeah, it is in the makefiles the way they are, and I don't know. I mean, those can be updated if that turns out to be what we need to do. We could PR things
Yeah,
into
again,
core.
that also feels like
Actual,
way out of my wheelhouse. This is
yeah,
here. I'll put this in the chat.
yeah,
Um, ah, whoops. Somehow is messaging
yeah,
just Michael.
yeah, yeah. It's setting variables for
Yeah, and it's just setting it directly as C and C++ instead of
yep.
inheriting a variable from anything else in the build to say, well, let's use Ccache. So it was just a question of like, could this help? That's and I just
Yeah.
again, I don't know who to talk to, who maintains this make file for Node. Because
The
as far
answer
as
is the entire project, which is not a great answer.
yeah, well,
Yeah, it's the same as everything. It's like yeah, Node doesn't really have a strict ownership structure, if that's the word. It's like, yeah, people volunteer to maintain the bits they maintain. I mean,
Sure, but I wasn't sure if the makefile was like the release engineer is the one who really like understands that one, or who built this, or they're
it's people that build on Macs.
yeah.
Which there are some people I think people you've mentioned have in the past built on that platform, so they might have views. I don't touch Macs as much as I can, so yeah, I don't know. This is beyond my understanding as well, but yeah. Uh,
Okay, yep, I see the last PR that actually changed this. Build a binary that's both x d4 and ARM. I'm just going back through history now. Okay, well, Ash. Yep. Okay, so Ash was the one that wrote that whole make stuff. So
so
is
yeah, it's like I'm assuming then yeah, it was updated and not really touched since. So
yeah,
yeah.
4 years ago. Now, the question I have is, I'm not familiar with uh contributor participation levels and things like that. Like, is Ash
Mhm.
someone that has like stepped away from Node and doesn't do Node
Yeah.
anymore? Is Ash someone that's available
Yeah,
for things,
he
or
he used to be he used to work with Michael and myself at IBM/Red Hat, and then
Mhm.
he left. And after he left, he sort of has become much less involved in Node. So
Got it?
yeah, he's not been. I don't think he's participated much since for a couple of years now, but I think he's still around on GitHub. So you could try reaching out to him that way.
Hmm.
I can't remember if we've removed him from build. I know Michael did an audit of membership, and I can't remember if we removed him at that point. Um, but that's something I can check. But yeah,
His GPG keys may still be in the secrets repo.
could
But
be,
again,
could be.
um,
Yeah.
well, in any case, I'm starting to kind of get a better understanding, because like over
Yeah.
the wall of the actual code base is
Hmm.
something that I just haven't delved into at all yet. I haven't looked and understood
Yeah.
what's going on the other side and things like that. So just kind of trying to keep my head down into the infra side of things, and seeing that this sort of bridges the gap between it, but also it doesn't seem like anyone really owns it right now. It does seem like something that I could submit a pull request to Node
Yeah.
saying, we're going to try and change this for,
Yeah.
to see what happens for a release.
Yeah.
Challenge is like the only way to see it work is to check the nightlies, or, I'm not sure how to test it.
Yeah, pretty much, I think. I think in the past we have created other, copies of like the release job and then run it on like a nightly or a test build,
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah. I could do that. So submit a pull request that changes it to Ccache and then
and
create
then
copies of the
run like
release,
a copy of the job, or yeah,
right? And just
well, either
run.
run a test build on that, or yeah, run. I mean that's our way of doing it, or I suppose in theory, it's less ideal is that you could take an actual Mac OS image and directly get on the machine and run the commands that the Jenkins jobs are running.
Well, yeah, that's the other thing I was gonna
Yeah,
kind of see about, because that it would help to have the actual Ccache populated, like for those
yeah,
things. Okay, great. That all helps because I mean I want to put this like macOS thing to bed to be like it works now and it's fast and we're happy with it, and as opposed to, well, these releases take 4 hours, whatever.
yeah. I would recommend. I don't know if he'll be able to help you on this particular thing, but maybe talking to Michael Zasso anyway, because I don't know if like the V8 updates he's doing might drag in other Mac OS work that might need to happen.
Hmm.
I'm hoping it doesn't, but I never know.
Yeah,
With Mac OS, yeah, sometimes it's like we need to bump up Xcode versions, and sometimes it's like no, it's fine.
yeah.
I don't know what the answer to that is. So
Now
yeah, I mean,
there was
yeah.
one other thing related to this macOS stuff that was our what we're testing on and what we're supporting
Hmm.
has a lot to do with Node 20, and doesn't Node 20 come like
No,
stop
Node
being
20
supported?
is another year. So Node 18 will go out of support next month. But
Okay, so
Node
Node
20 will,
18.
Node 18, yeah. So Node 18 will go out at end of support next month, end of next month, and Node 20 will be April next year.
Right, but no, so Node 18 is next month, and then that is what changes with what we need to do with OS X, or what do we no longer need to do? I feel like there was a gap between 18 and 20 that something changed.
That may have been the 10.15 support.
Okay,
Um,
maybe that's it.
I forget the exact versions. I know at one point we moved up to like macOS 11,
Hmm.
I think. Again, this is where I'm slightly less woolly, and I'd have to go back into the like the issue history and the code on the core repos to see what we
Yeah,
documented that's being supported on what versions of Node. Um, but yeah, I think 18 definitely still had like 10.15 stuff in there. But I got a feeling we did move stuff because we were forced to move stuff for signing. So I
yeah.
think we are now building on, we must be building on macOS 13 everywhere.
We're testing on macOS 13 everywhere, and we're building
Yeah,
on macOS 13 and targeting, I think
targeting
targeting macOS
10.15.
10.15.
Yeah. But I don't think, is that right? We don't have 10.15 machines anymore.
No,
So,
well, we do. I still need to tell
all
Mac
right.
Stadium to shut them off, but
Okay. But not actually, running in anger
no.
on the CI. So again, I suspect there might be a small, I think we've always had slight gaps in terms of what we claim these binaries are compatible on and what we've actually had available, at Mac Stadium and before that, also at hosted at Nearform,
Hmm.
because it's completely reliant on what hardware we had access to.
Right,
So in the past, I think older versions of Node supported macOS 10.13, but we've never had 10.13 anywhere in any of our CI systems. And
right.
I think we've more or less said, all right, as long as we've got some testing, we kind of trust that if we say that we target 10.15, Xcode will do the right thing.
Right. That
Um,
Xcode is building for 10.15, and it works on 10.15, even though we only
we have
tested on
more or less
10.13.
trusted that it does it the right
Yeah.
thing. And then,
Okay.
if we can test on it, great. And if we can't test on it, well, we won't fall over ourselves to try and do something that's going to be really difficult to set up if it.
Right. So
Um,
really, the only thing we need to change once Node 18 and goes EOL is change the targets to say, okay, build our minimum target of 11 now instead of 10.15
we
or
have
whatever.
already. Yes, I guess. Nice of that. So we've got a selector thing for build, and then the actual in the makefile, it's not in the makefile. In one of the build files itself, it has the targeting thing, but the targeting thing is set per node version. So node
Got it.
20 already targets probably a different version
Oh,
than
oh, okay, okay, great.
so in terms of what Xcode is being told to do, that is in the core repo. And there is another bit, there's like a Groovy script in Jenkins. Is that the directory
Mm-hmm.
in the build repo? Which
Yeah,
basically does a regular expression match on the one of the build parameters. It does a regular expression match to say, do I need to run this for node version X?
that was the one thing that I wanted to mention is that there may be a issue with doing the regular expression match to figure out what to run in certain
Okay.
scenarios, because these new macOS Orca instances no longer have the architecture in the node name. And so anything that's checking the node name for x64 ARM or checking for macOS is
Okay.
not going to hit that, because they're just like VM-8QLL3 or something, So
I I would need to check. I'm hoping that most of the things we're keying decisions off from is actually looking at a Jenkins label.
mhm.
Um, but
I
if you
did
do
see
find
node name
anything
in
that's
one
going off the
place,
node
but
name, we'll raise that and we'll have a look at it.
okay,
Um, it should be going off a label. Well, ideally, it would be going off a label because then the labels are things we can control. At least I
right,
hope we can still control labels on the ephemeral
right.
machines.
Yes,
Otherwise,
yes.
would be completely unmanageable.
Yeah, no, we
We did
absolutely
have an
can't.
issue where I think at one point we had macOS labels where I almost assumed that macOS 11 was ARM everywhere and not Intel. And then later on we had like X-X64, and then I think we've now tried to put a dash ARM so that we've got explicit labels for ARM and Intel. But at one point we had a label that had no architecture that meant that it was actually ARM, which confused everything. I'm hoping that has been sorted out now, but that was a switch we made recently, last year, I think.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, in the ideal scenario, things would be keyed off labels, and then the labels would be distinct enough that we could actually do proper proper matching and know what we're matching against, and not have to make other second guesses as to what's going on there.
Cool. Well, all right. I think, yeah, that answers most of my, spider web of Mac OS.
Okay. And yeah, just feel free to post in Slack or ask in issues, or reach out. I can't promise I can answer everything, but we can probably find someone or try and find someone that does.
All right. So maybe I'll just maybe I'll open a pull request on that make file and see
Yeah,
what
why not?
happens.
Why not? We'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Thanks, Richard.